My name's Andrew Squire, and I work for Devon County Council. The part of the council that I work for is called the Virtual School, and my role is job title is an area learning advocate. So my job really involves working between social care or social workers, schools, and alongside the young person to make sure that the school is supporting and the young person is getting on as well as they can with their education. So that's what I do most of the time. So it involves me working. I probably work with about, I would say, on my caseload, I've got about 200 children, so quite a large caseload, aged between um, statutory school age, so 5 up to 18 is what I cover. I do a number, and all of those children are in care to Devon. So they would all be young people who are in foster care of some kind. So they might be living with a family, they might be living in a residential. Some of them are working in special schools, some of them work in mainstream schools. Part of my role is to make sure that all young people who from that on my caseload have a school to go to, because quite often if placements break down, then there's quite a lot of school moves. I guess in terms of the project, the kind of character of the young people that I work with is very much young people who've had a lot of adverse childhood experiences, which has led to their care status. Um, there's a varies from case to case, but there's the care planning for a lot of those children. Sometimes it's long-term foster care. Sometimes it would be reconciliation and going back into the family. Sometimes it might be going towards an SGO, so a special guardianship order. So it varies where the destination is. Yeah, so that's the main part of my job. So I spend a lot of time working with other professionals, um, either in school or out of school, to make sure that the right kind of support is in place. Um, in terms of the kind of interesting bits for the project, we do a lot of work around relational planning with the schools, which recognises the issues that a lot of those young people have with their relationships and their attachments. And we try and work with schools to make sure that the provision meets that need, because sometimes sometimes young people can have really quite significant issues around how their attachment issues affect their education and the way they interrelate with the curriculum and with kind of school structures and systems and policies. So that's part of what I do, is try and help to put the right support in place and work with the schools around those issues as they arise. I guess in terms of the project itself, it's been really interesting thinking about my background and what I do, and the other the way that other countries go about things. So I went on a visit to Sweden and Spain, and obviously have worked with the other colleagues from Italy, and it's been really interesting to see how similar some of the things are and how different some of the things are. I think one of the things that struck me, particularly when we went to Sweden, are the kind of geographical areas that their services are based around, which are quite a lot smaller than ours. And we're working in Devon. We're a huge county. I mean, really very large county, and we work with educational psychology teams that cover the whole county. Ourselves as a virtual school, we cover the whole county, although my role is a kind of patch within that county, and services are spread quite widely across geographical areas. And I guess that was quite a difference with the way that we saw things working in Sweden. It was similar sorts of structures and professionals that are working together around a child. But I think the availability of resources on a local level was quite interesting and different. Um, I think there were with Sweden as well, there were quite a lot of differences in terms of the way that they approach, or certainly the schools we went to, the way that they were approaching behaviour of children in school, and the kind of value base that they had to that, which you know which English schools have, but it was just done in a very different way. And I think the that was really insightful. And I'm writing a little bit about um, exclusions, particularly for the um, project, because that's something that in some of the countries we're working with, they don't have that from schools. Um, so that's been a really interesting area to look at, and I think it's been interesting for the other countries to find out what we do and how that works, and the consequences of that for young people. So yeah, that's been part of the really interesting areas in terms of the project. I think it's been really interesting on lots of different levels. Working with the other professionals, it's been interesting in this country because we've been working with the police as well, and it's been really useful to talk about the links that they have into the education system and how they're involved in decision making around young people who have have come into their system, who've had lots of adverse childhood experiences, and how we link into that. That's been interesting and useful to have. Um, and I think with other countries, I think yeah, that way that they organise things is quite different. Definitely in Spain, it was very different to the way that we would organise things, but similar sorts of professionals involved. Um, yeah, and I guess in terms of outcomes, I think yeah, I think the outcomes in different countries is difficult to quantify maybe how those things are, and I think that's an interesting area for the project to look at. You know, the actual outcomes for young people um, in terms of their education um, attainment is that's an interesting area, and I think that's quite different from place to place. Certainly in Seville, some of the challenges that the school were facing in Seville are you know, really significant challenges, and yeah, I think you know, the dedication of the education staff to their young people was similar in all the different countries, which was, you know, not surprising, I guess, but you know, I mean, that's and the motivations for people being involved in the work they're involved in were quite similar. I think in terms of the project, it's quite interesting because obviously, you know, English is the first language of the project, but there's lots of you know, people's first language is not everybody's is English, so that has its own challenges, and understanding different terminologies um, and understanding, you know, and making that link after a while of, oh, that's what they're talking about. Oh, that's similar here. We do this, and it's kind of the same thing but described in a different way. So that was quite interesting, and I think that's um, I think we talked about the kind of themes in terms of how we work um, kind of in multi-agency ways in the different countries, and I think that kind of communication issue is probably one that's common within the systems in our own countries as well, between different agencies. You know, terminologies um, can be quite different. Sometimes value bases can be quite different as well. So they kind of create their own challenges, and they have done a little bit within the project, but it's been more to do with understanding what somebody's perspective is, or understanding their terminologies, and making sure we understand you know, that what they're talking about is this part of what we do, because yeah. I mean, most of the young people that I work with have had quite significant adverse childhood experiences, which have led up to their coming into care. In terms of schools, there's a lot of challenges that this faces because the young people tend to have quite a lot of issues around their attachments, their a way that they're able to form kind of social relationships, the way that they interact with the curriculum. These are all quite significant challenges for young people, which can often mean that they find themselves feeling quite marginalised in schools, finding it difficult to form positive relationships, finding it difficult to kind of relate to the structures that schools have. So we work within that kind of area all the time. That's a big part of what we do in our job, in our jobs in the virtual school. So we would be working, looking at the way that we can plan in a relational way for those young people. So we'd be putting in place support through the educational psychology service, or pulling together groups of people to try and problem solve around the difficulties that a young person might have. We might be working with schools to put in place additional practical support in terms of offering, kind of sort of alternative curriculum provisions to run alongside what the school are offering, um, all with the aim of actually trying to develop the child's, young person's relationships and ability to kind of thrive within the school. So we do a lot of that. We have funding attached to that as well. So it's one of the good things about my job is I can go into a school and they will describe a problem and I can think, oh, maybe we could try this, and then we have some funding to be able to do that, which is really good. So we do that all the time for young people, and we have something called the Pupil Premium, which is Pupil Premium Plus, which covers young people who are currently in care. There's also a Pupil Premium Plus for young people who've previously been in care and gone into adoption or an SGO. And I work with schools with those young people as well. We have a different remit around that because we would work with them in giving information and advice. We don't have so much support that we can draw on for those young people, but there is a recognition within the way that we um, we are tasked with that areas of responsibility, that group of young people have also often had adverse child experiences which affect their schooling. So yeah, we do a lot with that. With the Educational Psychology Service in Devon, we run a number of projects with them. So we would run, if a young person is suffering a lot from anxieties and is struggling to attend school, we have a program which is aimed at reintegrating a young person into school and looking at the issues that are behind that young person's anxieties or difficulty in attending, and then working with those. We have a project called Reducing Exclusions in Devon Schools, which is a bespoke program for young people and to support the school, which works from an understanding of adverse childhood experience, the impact that has had on that child and on their development, and then we work on developing relational practice within school to try and help that young person then to thrive and flourish more than they are at the moment. So schools would draw upon that if the young person was starting to get some fixed term exclusions or was in danger of getting some fixed term exclusions. So we work in that way. We might just offer a consultation with an educational psychologist to a school to look at those aspects of that they're finding difficult within school. We offer kind of support for kind of curriculum enhancement. So if a young person has maybe struggling with their maths or their English, then we could put in some tuition to help them close those gaps between where they are and their age-related expectation. So we work in that way. We work to recognising that change is often a difficulty for young people who've had an adverse childhood experiences, kind of changes in relationships, which might be there might be a real risk of that having a big impact on the young person at transition points in school. So from year 6 into secondary school, or from year 11 into post 16 education and training or employment provision. So we can put in place some support through the educational psychology service then as well, to work with a team around the child to try and put in place the sort of practice that's going to help them to well, to be able to adjust as best they can and flourish. Wonder what else we do. Other initiatives. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to me. There's lots of sort of things there that I feel like if you weren't aware of ACEs, you would never think about, such as like the transition between.
Yeah, I guess one of the big aspects I've missed out is that we have a lot. We put a lot of training in place for schools as well around adverse childhood experiences and the impacts that can have. We commission a particular training package called attachment-based mentoring, which trains particular members of staff in a school um, around all of the science and issues connected with adverse childhood experiences. So the impacts that has on a young person, child's development, their brain development, and then the difficulties that that can lead to within schools, and the types of provision that the school can put in place to try and support a child who's in that situation. So we do a lot of training for that. We've been running that training with Devon schools now for probably, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. So there's a huge number of staff that have been trained in that and that works on the basis that the child needs to have a secure attachment at school to be able to then go off from that attachment to then flourish in more unknown or challenging situations, and then they can come back to that attachment figure to be able to talk through any issues they've had, or it's a trusting and good firm relationship, which is kind of quite counterintuitive to some schools, because there's a real move, certainly within the SEND world, to not have children too attached to an adult, because it can hamper their independence and their development of their independence. So there's a little bit of a balance there, but from a kind of we're coming from a scientific starting point, in terms of what young people need in terms of their attachments, and them feeling confident enough to move off from them and take some risks. Yeah, I think it's a really kind of the data that we know about the impacts of exclusion on a child's life chances are, particularly permanent exclusion, they're not good indicators. I think there's a number of indicators which you can look at, kind of academic attainment, speech and language, exclusion, and then when you look at certain characteristics of um, cohorts of the population further up, further on in age, then those are some of the markers which characterise people who've maybe gone into the prison system. Or so it's an area that we're really keen to reduce the risk of that. And it was really interesting going to Sweden, because they don't have that, and they have to do other things, and schools can't exclude a young person. So they've developed other structures in place to try and make sure that doesn't happen. And we do that to a certain extent with the young people who are in care, because we have protocols around that with schools where we will avoid permanent exclusion, and we will preempt if things are going wrong, so that we can move a child into a more, we might look at a managed move to another school, or we might put in, kind of alternative supports around that child to try and avoid that happening, because the impact of that can be really detrimental to a child's long-term life prospects. So we're really aware of that, and that's a big part of what we try to do. There's another team in the county called the inclusions team, who work a lot, who work with exclusion a lot, and one of their remits is to try and reduce the risk of exclusion as well. Yeah, I think it is. I mean, there's a report called the Timpson Report, into exclusion. I've got a link to it in the paper that I've been preparing for the project. Um, and that really talks all about the consequences of it and how detrimental it can be. And there's a number of recommendations on there, which are being looked at and implemented. But yeah, I think there is a recognition, but it's what you do about it. And because it's trying to avoid that is really key. Because at the end of it all, you've got a young person who might not be able to attend a school, but they're still part of society and there's still all those issues there for them, and it needs to be addressed and supported and followed up by people. And I mean, looking at the backstory for a lot of those young people and the adverse child experiences that they've faced, um, it's often you kind of think there's a lot of preventative work that could happen earlier on to stop it coming to that. I think for a lot of children, it's been really, really difficult, really testing, not having. I mean, I think probably from a very much an adult perspective, and also obviously a long-term education perspective, and thinking about young people's futures, the educational impact is quite significant for some young people. If they haven't had the support in place. I mean, our young people who are in care have had that support. They've had access to, kind of online learning and computers, and we would have expectations around the care of those young people, which would be supportive of education. It's not true for all young people, though, I don't think, particularly, where there are safeguarding concerns, children who've been child in need or on child protection register. So I do think that's been an issue. Some of our children have really flourished because they found maybe being in school and in smaller groups, they found that really, really helpful. They found sometimes some of our children being at home and being with those people they've got their closest relationships with has been beneficial to them, and they've been able to access some online learning and access the carers have been able to support them with their learning, so that's been really good. And then we've had children who it's been really, really tricky for from an anxiety, mental health point of view. Probably less than we'd anticipated, who've got really significant mental health anxiety issues around going back to school. Most of our young people have adapted really amazingly to the changes that have happened, and it just reminds you again how resilient young people can be, and how all those sort of things that are thrown at them, they just get on with it. But I think from a lot of young person's perspective, it's been those things that they've missed out on with their peers, the social interactions, the sports, all of that normal growing up childhood fun and play. I think it's been really difficult for a lot of children from that point of view, and we'll see what the long-term impacts of that are.